So today I'm going to be bringing you I would like to call it, it's a traditional, non-traditional interpretation of the book of Jonah. So to start off, I would like to invite you to imagine with me. You are on a ship. You are feeling the movement of the sea beneath you. It is a gentle, rocking feeling. The salt-smelling air hits your skin, and it is cool and brisk. You wrap your coat closer around you as you turn to face the sun to soak in its rays. You are on a journey between lands, and you feel a sense of change and possibility within you. You are not alone on this vessel. All around the deck, you see people of different ages. You see families and younger people. You see people huddled together as well as people standing alone, lost in thought, looking out on the horizon. And from your position on deck, you hear a multitude of different languages. And though you do not understand exactly all that you hear, you sense echoes of emotions that you too have felt. You hear anxiety. You hear excitement. You hear awe. A richness of difference is housed on this ship, yet we are all sharing in this same journey across the waves. Waves that hit the boat's wooden sides, and a thump, thump, thump. But across the horizon, you're looking out and you begin to see dark clouds forming and approaching. The wind has picked up suddenly. It begins to rock the ship, now no longer in a gentle back and forth, but with an angry force. The people on board are grabbing on to whatever is near to keep their balance. Suddenly, cold rain begins to pelt the ship and all who are upon it. What had once seemed so stable and strong now seems fragile, as if the ship itself is threatening to break up and be lost on the choppy seas. Some people run for cover in the hold of the ship, but there is only so much room, and most are left out on the deck, vulnerable to this mighty storm. The sailors around you, they're yelling orders at one another. They have begun to throw overboard the cargo in order to lighten the load. The storm has blown in this sense of chaos and panic and fear in the people. The people, you hear them, they are calling out to their gods. They are asking for protection and forgiveness. All on board are crying out in despair that their fate is so quickly changed. They are seeking something, someone to blame, searching desperately for what has caused this storm and pleading for the right sacrifice. The people are yelling at one another, and your own voice is amid the noise. Suddenly, though the storm and the conflict continues to rage, there is a silence on board. A man speaks up. He says, I am a Hebrew. I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the seas and the dry land. Pick me up and throw me in the sea, then the sea will quiet down for you. For I know it is because of me that this great storm has come upon me. The people stop. We look uneasily at one another, and though the wind is whipping around you still, you hear someone hiss, Jonah. Jonah, the prophet who ran but could not hide from his call. He is remembered through children's story and song, less for his bravery as a prophet, and more for his cowardice and refusal that landed him in the belly of a whale. So this book of Jonah is often scoffed at. 3 days in the belly of a big fish just sounds too improbable, would I say? Maybe a little bit too metaphorical. I mean, how big was this big fish? And how could Jonah have possibly survived 3 days in a digestive system? And are we to believe that God uses whales as hitmen of the high seas? I mean, come on. Yet, the book of Jonah, it speaks to me. It speaks to me of what happens when we resist God's call, when we run away from and deny what we know to be true, when we refuse to see the storms that are building around us. So the prophet is already running by the 3rd verse of the book of Jonah. The first chapter in this book is aptly named, Jonah Tries to Run Away from God. Have you ever tried to run away from your calling? Afraid of power, afraid of purpose, have you ever evaded responding to what has been given to you to do or to say? I know I have. And have you ever run away so much that the truth you were avoiding eventually felt like it was going to consume you, like it was going to eat you alive? Sometimes fear keeps us from responding, and sometimes it feels like we have no choice but to respond. So in the beginning of this scripture story, God calls to Jonah and says, go at once to Nineveh and cry out against their wickedness. And so, Jonah, obviously, instead of responding, decides to flee. I understand his fear. He boards a ship to Tarshish. And it is during this voyage that God hurls a mighty wind upon the sea, causing the storm that threatens to break up the ship. Jonah, meanwhile, has been sleeping in the hold. He's been denying the fury of this storm. But in the panic on board, he is pulled out of bed. He must now stand accountable to the presence of the others upon the ship. They knew he was fleeing from the presence of the Lord because he had told them so. Sometimes we are more honest with others than we are with ourselves. Pulled out of his denial, Jonah stands before them and admits that he is the accountable. He tells the people that he must be thrown overboard in order for the storm to cease. The people on the boat, they try to row backwards. They try to row back to shore, but this backwards movement is not an option, and they are forced to throw him overboard. Jonah hits the water. The seas cease their raging, the wind calms, and Jonah, the prophet who unsuccessfully fled, is swallowed by a whale where he spends the next 3 days and nights in prayer and apology. So in the book of Jonah, God is speaking through the seas, and the storm, and the wind, and the whale, and in this teaching story, as in so many others in the Bible, the messages of God and the messages of the divine are delivered through the immense power of the earth. It is God's imperative that is on the wind and in the waves that toss the boat around. And it is within the whale that Jonah feels the power of God. It is in the darkness of his belly in which he finally meets his purpose, and in this darkness in which Jonah finally meets himself. It is there that he calls out in prayer. And it is only through this powerful and persistent persuasion of the planet, it is only through this, that Jonah has finally come around to face his divine purpose. Now he is ready to sacrifice, and he's ready to respond. Now he is released from the whale, and given another chance. Now, much like Jonah and the others aboard the ship, we too, right now, we too are receiving messages through mighty winds and terrifying storms. We too are receiving imperatives from the sea. And so this leads me to ask, what is the earth crying out right now that we must hear? From the winds and the waters of Superstorm Sandy, the severe destruction of Hurricane Katrina, and the melting of the ice caps are within the droughts of recent years. What is the earth calling out in the extreme weather patterns unprecedented in recorded history? What is the earth telling us in this era of mass extinction? How is the earth calling to us to respond? I feel the earth hurting. Do you feel her hurting? I hear her anger that we have not lived in harmony and balance with creation, that we have denied our interdependence in favor of consumerism. Can you hear the earth crying out in pain and righteous rage that we have abused creation as a means rather than honored creation as an end in itself? That we have lived in blatant rejection of the story of Genesis. That when God so created the world, the plants and the animals, God saw that it was good. And so I wonder with the earth speaking to her children more violently, more insistently every year, when are we going to respond? When are we going to wake from our beds of denial and take responsibility before the whole world community? All of creation is affected by the earth's crying out for justice and right relationship. Remember, there is little room in the hold of this lifeboat, and most are left out in the elements to suffer the storm. How are we going to respond to this call to radically reimagine how we live in covenant with all of creation? Are we going to be like Jonah? Run from God's call and flee our responsibilities? Do we have to be swallowed by the whale before we begin to pray and act our way into another way of being? Or dare I wonder and dare I ask, are we already in that belly? Are we already in that belly of the whale, clinging to rafts called entitlement? Bobbing in the digestive juices of denial as the carcasses of species going extinct are floating around us. Do we have to be swallowed by this whale before we are brave enough to respond? I invite you to imagine with me. We are back on the ship. The fever of conflict is raging as strong as the storm that is whipping our vessel around on the choppy seas. The people, we are yelling out accusations. We are pointing fingers at one another. There is a sense of fear and helplessness under the anger and blame. Suddenly, though the storm continues to rage, a child yells, "Stop!" The people freeze. We look at one another. Every person has a finger pointed outward with another finger of blame trained on them. It's us. All of us. God is speaking to all of us through these storms. We are in the same boat. After all, we are the called. We are being held accountable as members of creation with immense power to do both good and harm. And right now, do you hear the earth? The earth is demanding that we create good. that we take responsibility for re-envisioning another way of being and make it so, that we voice the truths that the earth speaks out every day, truths about harmony, balance, beauty, and interdependence. We are living at a time in which our political and personal actions have the potential to impact life for generations. We are living at a crucible moment for the planet. We matter. Our actions matter. We are the ones that we have been waiting for. As Jonah jumped into the seas, God is calling to us to take the plunge, to wake from our beds of denial and respond to the cries of the earth. But we must remember that this cannot and should not be done alone. It is only together, in our unity and in our diversity, that we can create life-sustaining, life-transforming change. We are the ones we have been waiting for. The people on the boat, we have lowered our fingers of judgment. We are reaching out in compassion. We are gathering together, for we are more powerful together. We approach the edge of the ship, peering over the edge into the unknown. We hold on to one another, knowing that our life depends upon our relationships to each other, to the earth, and to God. Jump in.